At some point, every great athlete faces the same opponent. Not another player, not another team, time. No matter how talented you are, your body eventually slows down. Recovery takes longer, your reactions get just a little bit slower. The tiny advantages that made you great begin to disappear. It's happened to Michael Jordan, it happened to Roger Federer, it happened to Rafael Nadal, it even happened to Tom Brady. Eventually, time wins. So why, at 39 years old, is Novak Djokovic still competing with and sometimes defeating the best tennis players in the world? That's the question we're answering today. Most people think they already know the answer. They'll tell you it's his diet, or it's because he stretches. Maybe you've even heard that it's because he doesn't eat gluten. While those things may play a role, they don't come close to explaining the whole story. Because if longevity were really that simple, every professional athlete would be doing it. Instead, Djokovic has become something incredibly rare, not because he stopped aging, but because he learned how to adapt to it better than almost anyone who has ever played professional tennis, and that distinction changes everything. Let's put his career into perspective. By 2026, Djokovic had won 24 Grand Slam singles titles, more than 100 ATP Tour titles, 40 Masters 1000 tournaments, 7 ATP Finals championships, and he spent over 400 weeks ranked as the #1 player in the world. Those numbers alone make him one of the greatest players the sport has ever seen. But here's what's even more remarkable. He wasn't collecting those achievements in his 20s. Many of them came after turning 30. And even at 39, he was still making deep runs at Grand Slam tournaments. That almost never happens. Throughout the Open era, great champions have usually followed a familiar pattern. They rise, they dominate. Then age slowly pulls them back toward everyone else. Ken Rosewall won a major at 37. Roger Federer won his last Grand Slam at 36. Rafael Nadal captured one final French Open at 36 before injuries caught up with him. Those achievements were considered extraordinary. Yet Djokovic kept extending the timeline. He became the oldest world #1 in ATP history. He kept reaching Grand Slam semifinals. He kept beating players who grew up watching him on television. That's more than longevity. That's an anomaly. But here's the interesting part. If you watched the young Novak Djokovic, you never would have predicted any of this. In fact, his biggest weakness wasn't his backhand or his serve. It was his body. Early in his career, people questioned whether he could physically survive the biggest matches. Some even wondered if he would ever become a true champion. Ironically, those early struggles may have been exactly what forced him to reinvent himself. And that reinvention changed tennis history. If you only started watching tennis during Novak Djokovic's dominant years, it's easy to assume he was always destined to become one of the greatest players in history. But that's not how his career began. Far from it. In the mid-2000s, Djokovic was already incredibly talented. His backhand was exceptional. His movement was among the best on tour. His return of serve was beginning to frustrate even the biggest servers in the game. But there was one problem that kept showing up: his body, again and again. Long matches seemed to wear him down. He struggled with breathing. He dealt with fatigue. There were retirements during important matches. Critics questioned his conditioning. Some even joked that he would call the trainer whenever things became difficult. At the time, few people believed this player would someday outlast Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and almost everyone else from his generation. Looking back now, it's almost impossible to imagine because the player we know today is famous for the exact opposite. He's known for lasting longer, recovering faster, and winning the longest matches. So, what changed? According to Djokovic himself, everything started when he began looking for answers beyond the tennis court. He worked with nutrition specialists. He experimented with his diet, eventually removing gluten, along with several other foods that he believed were affecting his energy and recovery. Now, it's important to be careful here. Scientific research absolutely supports the importance of nutrition for athletic performance, but it does not prove that one specific diet can turn someone into a champion. Even Djokovic has never claimed that diet alone explains his success. Instead, he describes it as one piece of a much larger transformation, and that transformation went far beyond what was on his plate. He became obsessive about recovery, sleep, hydration, flexibility, mobility, strength, breathing. Every small advantage mattered, not because any one change was revolutionary, but because all of them added up. There's a concept in elite sports known as the marginal gains philosophy. The idea is simple: improve dozens of small things by just 1%, and together they create an enormous competitive advantage. Whether Djokovic intentionally followed that philosophy or not, his career became one of the greatest examples of it. But here's something many fans overlook. His transformation wasn't only physical, it was tactical. The Novak Djokovic of 2011 was not playing the same style of tennis as the Novak Djokovic of 2026. As his body changed, his game changed with it. Early in his career, he often relied on endless movement, long rallies, grinding opponents into exhaustion. He could retrieve almost anything, and eventually, his opponents would crack. But no athlete can depend on that forever, not at 39. So gradually, almost quietly, Djokovic began evolving. His serve became more reliable. He earned more free points. His positioning became more efficient. Instead of running farther, he started standing in better places. Instead of reacting faster, he began anticipating earlier. To the casual fan, it didn't look very different. To tennis experts, it changed everything. Think of it this way. Imagine two people driving through a city. One driver has lightning-fast reflexes. The other simply knows every shortcut. At first, they arrive at the same time. Years later, when reflexes begin to slow, the driver who knows the shortcut suddenly has the advantage. That's what experience looks like in professional tennis. It doesn't always make you stronger. Sometimes, it simply means you don't have to work as hard. And nowhere was that more obvious than on the return of serve. Many analysts consider Djokovic the greatest returner in tennis history, not because he hits the ball harder, but because he reads the serve earlier. His preparation is almost effortless, his backswing is incredibly compact, and somehow, he consistently turns one of the biggest weapons in tennis into a neutral rally. That ability ages remarkably well, because anticipation can often compensate for declines in pure speed. By the time Djokovic reached his late 30s, he wasn't trying to play like the 23-year-old version of himself anymore. He couldn't. Instead, he became something even more dangerous, a player who understood exactly which battles still mattered and which ones weren't worth fighting. And that's why, when the next generation finally arrived, they weren't facing an aging champion. They were facing a champion. For nearly 15 years, men's tennis belonged to three players: Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic. Together, they redefined what greatness looked like. They broke nearly every record, won almost every major, and pushed each other to levels the sport had never seen before. Eventually, time caught up with Federer, then it caught Nadal, and for a while, it looked like Djokovic would be next. But then, something unexpected happened. A new generation finally arrived. Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, players who grew up watching Djokovic, players with younger legs, explosive speed, incredible power. Everything history says should replace an aging champion, and eventually, they did. But not immediately. Even in his late 30s, Djokovic kept ruining the script. He was still reaching Grand Slam finals, still making semifinals, still beating players more than a decade younger. Every time people declared him finished, he found another way back. Not because he had become faster, but because he had become smarter. Think about that for a moment. At 25, athletes often rely on physical gifts. At 39, those gifts have faded. So every match becomes a different kind of competition. One player is trying to overwhelm you with speed. The other is trying to solve the puzzle before it even begins. That's what Djokovic became. Less of a sprinter and more of a chess master. But even chess masters can't stop the clock. Wimbledon 2026 proved that perfectly. Against Felix Auger-Aliassime, Djokovic survived more than 5 hours on center court. The victory felt impossible. The headlines called it another miracle, another reminder that Novak Djokovic simply refused to age. Then, less than 48 hours later, he faced Jannik Sinner. This time, there was no miracle. The recovery wasn't there. The margin had disappeared. For the first time, the effects of time were impossible to ignore. And that's exactly why that tournament matters. Not because Djokovic won, not because he lost, but because it showed both truths at the same time. He could still produce moments that almost nobody his age should be capable of, but he could no longer do it as often. That isn't failure, it's reality. History tells us something interesting. Ken Rosewall won a Grand Slam at 37. Jimmy Connors reached an unforgettable U.S. Open semifinal at 39. Roger Federer won majors into his mid-30s. Rafael Nadal did the same. Each achieved something remarkable, but each represents only one piece of the longevity puzzle. Djokovic combined almost all of them: late major titles, the oldest world number one in ATP history, success on every surface, deep Grand Slam runs, and victories over players young enough to have grown up idolizing him. That's why his career stands apart, not because he escaped aging, but because he stretched greatness further than almost anyone thought possible. Maybe that's the lesson. We spend so much time looking for athletes who defeat time that we miss what's actually happening. Nobody defeats time. Not Federer, not Nadal, not Jordan, not Brady, not Djokovic. The difference is simply how long they can keep the score close. And maybe that's what greatness really is. Not avoiding decline, not pretending you're the same player forever, but having the courage to evolve again and again until evolution isn't enough anymore. Because one day, every athlete walks off the court for the last time. Records are broken, championships fade, someone younger always arrives. That's inevitable. But very few athletes force time into a fifth set. Novak Djokovic did, and that may be the greatest victory of his career. I'm Alex, and this has been Beyond the Box Score, because sometimes the most important story has nothing to do with the final score.